In our last video, we drove the top of the world highway and arrived back in the Yukon after 2.5 unforgettable months in Alaska. While we're still sad to have left Alaska, we are beyond excited to be back in the Yukon.
We love the Yukon on our drive up to Alaska, and we cannot wait to check out some new spots. And first up, we're in the historic and charming town of Dawson City.
Dawson City is located on the Yukon River close to the Alaska border and offers a mix of both First Nation and Gold Rush history. For generations, this area was home to the Klondike First Nation, who still call the area home today, but their lives were disrupted in 1896 when gold was discovered in Bonanza Creek, kicking off the Klondike Gold Rush. About 1,000 nearby miners came to the area to stake their claims, and by 1897, news spread worldwide and an estimated 100,000 stampeded to the Klondike region, and the rush was on. In 1898, Dawson itself ballooned to more than 30,000 people, and while most of the newcomers discovered that much of the good ground had been claimed, gold was in abundance and many set up businesses to cater to the miners. Between 1896 and 1899, $29 million in gold had been mined, and Dawson became known as the Paris of the North. It was the largest city west of Winnipeg and north of Seattle, and was even the capital of the Yukon until 1953. There were dance and gambling halls, bars, brothels, churches, casinos, theaters, restaurants, supply stores, and anything else you can think of that a bustling boom town needed.
However, once gold was found in Nome, Alaska, many of these same gold seekers who came to Dawson City fled to Alaska searching for more gold. Even though the rush is over, gold is still mined in town, and the Klondike Gold Rush played a huge role in shaping North America, and we cannot wait to see and learn more of the town's history today.
We hear one of the best ways to experience the town is to go on a walking tour with Parks Canada. They have a variety of tours about town, and we're going on the historic downtown walking tour. This is a 1.5-hour tour that costs $6.75 Canadian per person, and will be led on the tour by a costumed tour guide that'll take us into buildings that are restored to what they look like during the gold rush that are closed to the public.
This is our tour guide, Elaine. We started the tour by heading to the Yukon River to learn how miners would get to the area, which wasn't an easy process.
We are standing on the banks of the Yukon River. The word Yukon comes from several First Nations languages that would have been spoken in this region. Chukon is the word, and basically it means big old river. And it is a big old river. It's about 3,300 kilometers, 1,900 miles long. And the headwaters are in Atlin, British Columbia, which is about 2 hours drive south of the BC-Yukon border. This river flows north, emptying out into the Bering Sea. And if you look at a map of this river, you'll see that it is enormous. The total drainage area for the Yukon, so the total area covered by waters that eventually flow out the mouth of the Yukon, is about 25% larger than the state of Texas. So if you were a gold rush stampeder, this would be where you would arrive. So you had two main routes to get up here. The all-Canadian route, which would have involved walking or riding on horseback through the interior of British Columbia or Alberta, a couple of great big mountain ranges in your way. It would have been buggy and muddy and miserable. Your other option was to get aboard a steamer departing from San Francisco, Seattle, or Vancouver. Make your way up the Inside Passage along the west coast of Canada, and you would arrive at Dyea or Skagway, Alaska. From there, you would get off and you would be faced with the Chilkoot Trail. Have we all seen that picture of miners going over the Chilkoot Trail? They got big packs on their back, their nose to rear up a hill. Looks like the world's most miserable conga line, and it certainly was. That trail is 55 kilometers, 33 miles long, and the first sort of 2 miles, 3 kilometers is straight up. There's a 3,000-foot elevation gain. Along that trail, you would meet the Northwest Mounted Police. They would stop you and weigh your supplies because they had mandated that you had to have a metric ton, 1,000 pounds, of supplies with you, or they would turn you around. So the reason for that is people were headed into the Canadian winter, and they had to have enough supplies, and if they didn't have 1,000 pounds, they were basically marching towards their certain death. So you had to just pack as much as you could onto your back, head up the hill, stash it somewhere, go back down and get more. Up and down the Chilkoot Trail, sometimes as many as 30 trips, until you had ferried your entire load the length of the trail to Bennett City. Bennett City is on Bennett Lake, and Bennett Lake is part of a series of interconnected waterways that eventually hook into this Yukon River. However, when you got to Bennett Lake, you would find that it was starting to ice up. And the Yukon River, where you were headed, was probably frozen already, because it had taken you so long. You'd start your journey up the Inside Passage in the early summer when all the ice had cleared from that channel. And then it would take you a few months going up and down the Chilkoot Trail to get your load over. So by the time you got to Bennett City, it was late fall and you weren't going anywhere. So you had to wait out the entire winter in Bennett City. And then when the river broke, you would get aboard anything that would float, a canoe, a raft, an improvised paddle wheeler, and you would make your way here to Dawson City.
After learning a bit about the journey to get to Dawson City, we headed to our first building, the bank, where Elaine told us why banking was important for miners.
So this is the Bank of British North America. The miners were ecstatic to see the presence of banks here. Gold is about 70% denser than lead. So if you're a miner with a paying gold claim, it's going to become a burden for you very quickly. You would want to change your gold for cash. So prior to the establishment of cash currency here in Dawson, you would have paid for everything using gold dust. Gold that comes out of the Klondike region is primarily flour or sugar gold, so not super nugget heavy. You would have a little poke on your hip pocket filled with gold dust, and that would be how you paid for things in businesses. Using either scales, every business would have had a set of scales, or for smaller ticket items like a drink of whiskey at the bar, a pinch of gold. Your pinch is a different size than my pinch, and gold that comes out of the creeks here is not 100% pure gold. It's primarily mixed with silver and manganese. So kind of a inexact way to do business. The way that the banks helped standardize this process was to create an inventory of every creek in the Klondike region, because the purity of gold varies from creek to creek.
We then headed to our second building, the saloon, which has been restored to look like what it did during the gold rush, even down to tiny details like the light fixtures.
This is the Red Feather Saloon, and it was built sometime between 1900 and 1902. It would have been one of 28 saloons operating here in Dawson City. So this is where you came to find out who was leaving town, who had struck it rich, who was shacking up, who was breaking up. This is where you came to do your gossiping. And of course, because we are in a place where it gets very cold, big town hall-like spaces are hard to heat. So most events that might take place in a community hall or a rec center or somewhere else took place in bars here. Because we're in the Victorian era and we want to show everybody all of our manners, it becomes customary to take your gold poke full of gold dust and put it on the bar when you're paying for your drink. And the bartender takes his pinch. Rather than you determining what size it is. Perhaps unsurprisingly, bartenders begin to grow their fingernails very long and take a little extra pinch. And then they wore their hair heavily pomaded and would slick that extra gold dust into their hair and then pan it out at the end of the night for tips.
And for our final building, we headed to the post office.
This is the old post office. This was built in 1900 in response to a demand from miners for more civil services. If you were one of those 35,000 prospectors who'd made it over the Chilkoot Pass and wanted to let your family know that you made it safe, your only option for mail prior to the establishment of postal service was to write your letter, address it, nail it to a tree, and the next guy headed south would carry it with him for as long as he was going, then hand it off, and eventually it got delivered. I don't know how any mail ever got delivered that way, but that's how it worked. Mail coming up was incredibly important. You can imagine, you wouldn't have heard anything from the outside world for up to 8 months, so that first mail steamer, once the Yukon River broke, would be a huge event in town. Prior to the establishment of a post office, the mail on the mail steamers that came up was handed over to the Northwest Mounted Police. They had a fort right on Front Street. It's called Fort Hirschmer. It's still there. And they took the mail bags, they looked at Dawson and 64 avenues, and they thought, how can we best deliver this mail? And basically they just took the bags, dumped them on Front Street, and made people line up for their chance to sift through. Even for the olden times, that seems like a terrible system. Thank you very much for joining me today. It's been wonderful to be your host. I'll be around for a few minutes afterwards if you have any questions. Otherwise, enjoy your time in Dawson City.
Thank you. That tour was incredible. This town is so well preserved and it's just so much fun to walk around and see all the buildings, but then getting to go in some of them was just an extra special treat. We've been to quite a few mining boom towns, but they've just really kept the heritage alive here. Like, it doesn't feel very modernized here, and that's what I really like about it.
My favorite part of the tour was just all the little details that the tour guide would share with us, and it just kind of gave you a better sense of what life was like here during those gold rush days. It was just so interesting and just a lot of fun.
Even though she obviously wasn't really around during that time, she just had so many cool little stories that we just wouldn't have known otherwise.
If you know anything about Dawson City, you may have heard of the unique tradition at the Sourdough Saloon called the sourtoe cocktail. This is a shot of alcohol, usually Yukon Jack whiskey, but the kicker is there is a dehydrated human toe dropped into the bottom of the glass. You can drink it fast, you can drink it slow, but your lips must touch the gnarly toe.
It's all in line with the above. You can drink it fast, you can drink it slow. But your lips must touch this gnarly toe. Two lips. No teeth, no tongue, no mouth. It's not chewing. Get it on, get it on, get it on. Here's the evidence of your calling.
The legend of the story goes back to the 1920s when a pair of brothers who were rum runners were on a run during a blizzard, and one of the brothers' feet went through ice, soaking his foot. Fearing they were being chased by the police, they couldn't stop, and by the time they could, his toe was frozen solid. The other brother cut off the toe to prevent gangrene, and they dropped the toe in some alcohol to commemorate the occasion. Years later, Captain Dick Stevenson was cleaning out a cabin and discovered the jar with the toe in it. After meeting with his buddies, they decided to start the Sourtoe Cocktail Club. Over the years, the club has acquired, by donation, over 25 toes.
They do these shots every night, and there are over 102,000 members of the club, but there's a big problem for us. We do not drink, and the only way to do the shot without alcohol is to do an air shot, which basically means they just put the toe in a shot glass, you have no liquid, and you're just getting straight toe to the lip, nothing to mask it, and yeah, we're not about that.
I am 100% A-OK being left out of this club.
I was actually on board to try it if they let me do soda or something with some sort of flavor, but since I cannot, I am a big no on this one. But if you do drink, you should definitely do it. It looks disgusting, it sounds disgusting, but it's such an iconic Dawson City thing to do. But for us, we're gonna do something that sounds a little bit more enjoyable. We're gonna go get a milkshake. We have wanted a milkshake for over a week now, ever since we were at Wrangell St. Elias, so it's making all my dreams come true.
That is way more enjoyable than a gnarly toe on my lips.
We know this video is a bit of a history overload, but there is just way too much history here, and we just headed a little bit out of town to dredge number 4, which was the largest wooden hole dredge in North America. And if you're not sure what a dredge is, it basically digs up dirt from underwater and then is able to sort out the gold. But to learn more about how this works and to see the inside, we're going on another tour with Parks Canada.
My name's Benny. I'll be your guide for the next hour. The type of gold that they're digging around for is placer gold. It's, you may have seen the word, it looks like placer. These are alluvial deposits, and it's really fine gold for the most part. It's kind of the consistency of the really small rocks that you see, of the fine sand. And over many years, with the movement of the earth, it's kind of sinking further and further down until it reaches bedrock. So you've got your claim, let's imagine, and you want to go down to bedrock. So your first step is digging a hole. Has anyone in this group ever dug a hole? Wow. Industrious group. Good. So, digging a hole is hard work, especially up here because there's something cold going on underneath the surface that makes it even harder to dig a hole. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? Yes. Ace in this quiz. Yeah, permafrost. So, to make the ground even soft enough to dig, these hand miners in the late 1800s have a few fires going on their claim. And that fire might thaw out half a foot or a foot of muck per day. So do the math on that one. You're doing maybe a foot per day and you're going 70, 100 feet below the surface. You're not getting down to your pay dirt in a weekend. This is often work that takes months and months and months, usually over the course of the winter. The main group of stampeders arriving 1898. Within the first year or so of them working these creeks, that first few layers right above bedrock on many of these claims was basically mined clean. Now obviously people were still sluicing and processing the gravel around the other gravel on their claim, but once the high-grade gold was mined out, what remained was really fine, and it kind of didn't make sense to use just what you had with shovels and pickaxes and buckets. You had to process a huge volume of gravel to get a relatively worthwhile amount of this really fine gold. In comparison, dredge number 4 was processing a ton of gravel, or 16 cubic feet, every 3 seconds. So it made sense. Your first step, so this did not operate on a river. I know there are river dredges. These ones operated in a pond, and it was a pond that was dug with shovels, steam shovels, 200 people digging these huge 15-foot deep pits. Once everything got here, the dredge would be constructed. That pit would then be filled with water. The dredge would then begin to float at 3,200 ton displacement weight. And once it begins floating, it then begins its digging career. The whole point of this is to really just reduce huge amounts of sand and gravel into ideally pure gold dust and gold flake. That's the simplest way to put what the goal is of this.
After learning a bit about why dredges were important to miners, we got to go inside of the dredge where we saw the motors and control area and learned more about the process of how the dredge separates gold from other items in the gravel. The two key components are gravity and water, and it all starts with the digging ladder, which has 60 buckets on it that can get 1 ton of dirt every 3 seconds. This dirt goes into the first processing area on board called a trommel. This is like a drum on a washing machine with little holes that rotate 8 times a minute, and as 5,000 gallons of water a minute pumps through, it helps separate the gold, which will fall through the holes onto the sluice run. The sluice run is similar to a slide and has surfaces on them that gold can lodge into as water is pushing other lighter rocks and sand down the sluice run.
So in a given day, one of those big swings, one of those cuts, around 30 tractor trailers full of gravel every day. And that is all reduced on a given day to around 300 ounces, or about the size of a half of a stick of butter. And in today's rough estimate market, somewhere around $600,000 or so. Gold mining is still the biggest industry in the territory, and tourism is the second biggest industry in the territory. So even though the dredge is no longer digging for gold, there still is gold.
We normally don't go on this many tours, but we highly recommend these Parks Canada tours while here in Dawson City. This one cost $15 per person and was about an hour, and this one was an information overload. We learned all about the inner workings of the dredge. Before this tour, we didn't know anything about dredges, and now we know tons. And shout out to our guide Benny, who was very informative and very entertaining.
But we're now gonna head back towards town to a spot called Midnight Dome, which overlooks the town and has amazing views of the area. Wow, what a view! All of the history and really cool old buildings make Dawson City worth visiting just on its own, but the fact that this is the scenery around the town just makes visiting here even better. It is gorgeous out here.
you can probably tell with these sweeping views, this is a very popular spot for sunset, especially on the summer solstice. People come up here and hang out all day long to watch the sun make its big loop all around the hill. We had hoped to stay up here for sunset, but we've got a date with the casino instead.
Big money, big money, big money. Ding, ding, ding. Right behind me is Diamond Tooth Gerties Gambling Hall, the oldest casino in Canada, established in 1971. It gets its name after Gertie Lovejoy, one of Dawson's most famous dancers from the Gold Rush era, who had a diamond between her two front teeth. While we aren't gamblers, this spot is known for more than just drinks and games. It is also home to can-can shows. There are 3 completely different shows every night, and it costs $20 per person for a season pass, which can get you into shows for the entire summer season. And one really cool thing about this spot is that it's a non-profit and all of the proceeds go back into the community. We hear that it's really fun to stay for all 3 shows, so we're gonna try really, really hard to stay awake and see all 3, and we're gonna try to snag some phone clips so y'all can see what it's like, but we gotta head in there, because if you cannot tell, I am getting poured on right now.
We're fading fast, y'all. We had to get some coffee.
We did it, you guys. We stayed up for all 3 shows. Woohoo!
We were dancing and singing. It was such a blast. We are not normally ones to partake in nightlife, but we had heard it was a must-do in Dawson City, and I'm really glad we went because it was a ton of fun.
But it is past 1 a.m., which is way past our bedtime.
I'm like that delirious. I'm like that. You're so tired, you're delirious, and you just are like hyper and giggly. That's where I'm at right now.
I'm about to drop a scare.
I need sleep. We have one more spot we want to check out here in Dawson City, but it was closed yesterday. A cool little spot called Bonton Company.
So this spot is a cafe by day with coffee, baked goods, and lunch items, and then a restaurant by night with cocktails and a changing menu featuring local ingredients. And I even read that they've been rated one of the best new restaurants in all of Canada.
We're starting with some delicious Americanos, which are much needed after our wild night out last night. And then in about an hour, when the lunch menu starts, we're gonna grab some goodies. For lunch, I got the roasted pork sandwich on a sourdough. So this has roast pork, Gruyere cheese, and pickled zucchini. This bun looks very nice. It's really pretty too on top. This sandwich is super delicious. Starting with the meat, it's got little flecks of herbs in there, so it's got lots of flavor. The pickled zucchini gives it a burst of tanginess, along with the mustard there on the bottom, and then the cheese and mayo on top, a little bit of creaminess. And then I'm thinking of a special word for this bun here.
Y'all know what it is?
I think you might know what it is. It is perfectly pillowy.
And I got the Bonton charcuterie board, and one thing that you'll notice about this place, when you're walking towards the bathroom, there's this little room with all these meats hanging. It's the aging room, so I thought trying some of their aged meats would be a good decision, and I can't tell you for sure what all of this is. Looks like there's some mustard, variety of meats, some pickles, some different cheeses, maybe like a jam, but it looks really good. What I love about charcuterie boards is that they're a fun little activity. You get to kind of craft your perfect bite, and that bite was nice and meaty, but it had its creaminess from the cheese. And then this little guy right here, we asked what it was, and I forget the official name, but it's like boiled down cherries, and then it has like an essence of mustard in it, which gives it kind of a spiciness and almost like a horseradish type flavor. So it's like sweet but spicy. So that with the cheese and the meat, it's such an interesting flavor combination, but it just works so well together.
But that's gonna do it for our time in Dawson City. Between the history, entertainment, and beautiful views, we had so much fun here.
We're gonna be in the area for a few more hours just tying up some loose ends because things are about to get really remote for us. You might think that we're gonna be heading south back to the lower 48 from here, but we're actually doing the complete opposite. We're going very, very north, and we'll share our plans in our next video, but if all goes according to plan, it'll be one of the coolest experiences we have had in our van.
You can drink it fast, you can drink it slow, but your lips must touch the gnarly toe.
Let me take a stab at it. You can drink it, but your lips must touch the gnarly toe. I sound like an old
Decrepit
woman.
old
I sound
woman.
like a decrepit old woman. Adam sounds like Captain Jack Sparrow when he does it.
Lady from Titanic. What's her name? April or something? No.
Rose.
Rose, that's it. I don't know. It's been a few years.